Last time we spoke to our chief meteorologist, Tim Deegan. He talked in depth about human-induced climate change and its impact globally. We continue our conversation by asking Tim about measuring climate change and if any new data has been discovered.
So when we talk about climate change, especially when we're talking about human-induced, it is really helpful for all of us, especially for science, to have something to compare with through the past. And fortunately for us, we had some brilliant doctors back in the 50s, and they were simply trying to verify science from some pretty brilliant people, even 30, 50 years prior to them, that developed the theory about greenhouse gases, CO2, carbon dioxide being the main one. And by the 50s, some folks said, why don't we start to measure that number? And so an instrument was placed pretty high up in the mountains on the side of one of the volcanoes in Hawaii, because pretty far away from any industrial areas. So therefore, we thought it would be a good, or they thought it would be a good way to measure just what was happening around the globe, not just near our industrial cities or polluted areas. So they started measuring numbers. It's kind of like a doctor saying, you know, we just don't want to take your temperature one time during the day. We want to take it 24/7. Or at least maybe we're concerned about your heart. We want to take your heart pressure not just once a week, but we want to take it every week for 52 weeks, just to see what kind of trends there are. So that's really science started in the 50s with CO2. Well, through the years, that number, as expected, has continued to rise, primarily because of the greenhouse gases, primarily because of what humans are doing, and that number has now reached a new record. It's at 424 parts per million. Now, I could go on and on about what that means, but basically we haven't seen CO2 at 424 parts per million for conservatively about 1 million years, and probably it's been a lot longer than that. Now, there's new ways to measure, and there's new ways to measure what the carbon dioxide was like hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years. Chemistry folks help us with that, oceanographers, but especially geologists, and especially those who can go into ice. They can now look into ice and see how much CO2 was in the ice hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, of course, way before there were any humans around, because yeah, this can happen in a natural way. It shows us or allows us to see what the numbers were like, or when the numbers were last this high.
So what about the role human-induced climate change has played in recent weather events like the fires in Canada that caused heavy smoke in the northeast United States?
Okay, so when we talk about climate change, there's no doubt about it. The climate on Earth has been changing throughout its life for billions of years. When we talk about climate change now, we're talking about what is the human influence, what is the human-induced part. And I bring that up because there's no doubt about it. Canada, with all of its amazing and beautiful forest, or even before it was named Canada, there's been wildfires as long as there's been forest there. But some climatologists back in the late 80s and 90s said, if in fact the human-induced part of climate change is occurring, it's going to continue to get worse as long as the CO2 numbers continue to go up. That is the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. And as long as that goes up, then weather extremes would become more frequent and would become more extreme. So when we talk about extremes, we're talking about droughts, which can lead to wildfires, or storms, which can lead to flooding, or hurricanes, which can become more intense, or even cold weather events that can become more intense. In other words, the droughts, if in fact this science is valid, and this is said back in the 90s, if it's valid, then we're going to see increasingly through the decades stormier storms, drier droughts, and therefore worse wildfires. So what's going on in Canada, wildfires has happened as long as forests have been around. But wildfires like we've seen, well, we haven't seen wildfires like this in human history, and it in many ways verifies what climatologists thought 30 years ago would be increasingly happening because of the rise primarily in CO2, but generally in the greenhouse gases that humans are putting into the air.
What about the impact on farming?
Human-induced climate change really impacting every aspect of our lives because the weather is changing. The daily weather, the seasonal weather, which of course is big to farmers, that is changing day by day, season by season, year by year, just a little bit. Maybe not noticeable to you and me if we're not farmers, but if we're farmers, you may not even notice 1 year or 5 years, but over 10 or 20 or 30 years, farmers are definitely noticing it worldwide. And those farmers who are have the least amount of, well, let's put it bluntly, money, and therefore the least amount of technology are definitely being impacted the most. If for no other reason than because the weather that they used to have is now changing. And we're talking everything from vegetables to grains to animals. That change, which we've always had, is just happening more dramatically. Here's another way to put it. So we have seen 424 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere before. When I say we, humans didn't. It's happened on Earth. But we've never seen on Earth the amount of change in carbon dioxide in as quick a time. Here's another way to put it. We've seen the parts per million of carbon dioxide. Just think of that as like a heart rate or the temperature for a human. We've seen that in the last less than 200 years go from about 250 parts per million to 424. As geologists and those who look into ice cores look back, they've seen those changes, but those changes have occurred over hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions. And so therefore, although in the past, at least up to a certain point, livestock, vegetation, humans, when we were around, could adjust over that slow period of time, we've never seen CO2 change so rapidly. And thus, there's many aspects of life, organic life, life that's dependent on carbon, which is one of the 6 key elements. We've never seen that change occur so quickly. I mean, in many ways, it's like the blink of an eye compared to how CO2 used to change millions of years ago.
Is moving to a gasless, all-electric society a viable solution?
Here's the way I look at it. Because we've waited, in my opinion, so long to really get after this, we're going to have to change things pretty rapidly. And most countries are beginning to change, some quicker than others. I think because we need to change rapidly, electric is a solution. It's not perfect, but I think we're at the point now to where we can't let perfect or a perfect solution get in the way of progress. At some point, hopefully, we can even do better than electric, because even electric itself, getting the material, moving the material, that causes greenhouse gases to go into the atmosphere. But if you look at, for instance, an electric vehicle versus a gas-powered vehicle, there's a whole lot less CO2 going in the atmosphere from the electric vehicle than there is from the vehicle that takes the gas. And again, that's just one small example. So electric isn't perfect, but we're going to need to go to electric in a broader way across the world to get a handle of this situation. But that's not the point I want to make. Some people try to make the point that the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere is going to cause the end of the world. And I guess they're doing that to get our attention. The problem is, some people then think, well, if it's going to cause the end of the world, then why even work on this? We don't see the end of the world immediately. There are solutions out there. So we're not at the point to where we need to give up. Electric is one of those, I think, kind of midway solutions to get to where we need to go. Bottom line is, there's always been carbon in the atmosphere. We need CO2 in the atmosphere to live. So we're not trying to get it to go like this. It's just right now the amount of CO2 is going like this. We're trying to get it to level off. Most of us in rich countries, and relatively speaking, we live in a rich country, we're going to be okay for another generation or so. But for those of us that really care about our kids and our grandkids, even in the rich countries, we're going to start noticing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Lastly, we asked him if he sees any silver lining to all of this.
My encouragement really is what I've tried to say before, and that is that when you hear catastrophic forecast of what's going to happen if we don't get a handle of the greenhouse gases, I think that's being done to get our attention, but we shouldn't think it's going to get so bad. Why don't we just party like it's 1999, or gosh, we might as well just give up, or it's not in our control. You know, the fact that we humans are causing the greenhouse gas problem, I think, is encouraging. Because if we're causing it, we can probably cause then solutions. Here's an example. The ozone hole, you may have heard about that. It really is different than what's happening because of the greenhouse gases. The ozone hole, which was a bad thing, way up high in the atmosphere, it was happening because the type of freon we, people on Earth, were putting into the atmosphere. But 1989, 1992, yeah, so about 30 years ago, the world decided, hey, this problem is bad enough, let's start putting less of that bad freon into the atmosphere. And slowly but surely around the world, there's been less of that bad freon being put in the atmosphere, and guess what? The ozone hole is getting smaller. So that's a problem that we were causing, looked bad, but we said, well, if we're causing it, maybe we can come up with a solution. Same thing with greenhouse gases. We're causing it, it continues to get bad, it continues to get worse, but that does mean we can solve the problem. So to me, that's encouraging. In other words, it's not just, oh, we put our hands up in the air and hang on for dear life. We can actually do something about this. And the fact is, we are doing something about it. I mean, it is too bad that the amount of CO2, the amount of greenhouse gases, is still going up. But I'm at least encouraged that because of what's happening in this country and other countries, at least there's signs that within a generation, maybe that curve will at least start slowing down. And if we really get after it, if we really cut loose the brilliant people that I know are out there for solutions, I think we can probably even see that CO2 level off, and maybe by the time of our grandkids, we can start to see that drop somewhat.